5 times world came close to World War III. Korean War. This arguably was World War III and occurred after Korea was split into two sovereign states in 1948. A socialist state was established in the north under the communist leadership of Kim Il-sung and a capitalist state in the south under the anti-communist leadership of Syngman Rhee. The conflict escalated into warfare when North Korean military forces, supported by the Soviet Union and China, crossed the border and advanced into South Korea on June 25, 1950. As a result, the United Nations dispatched forces to Korea to repel a North Korean invasion. But after the first 2 months of fighting, they were on the brink of defeat. These setbacks prompted US General MacArthur to consider using nuclear weapons against the Chinese on North Korean interiors, with the intention that radioactive fallout zones would interrupt the Chinese supply chains. However, the fighting ended on July 27, 1953, when the Korean Armistice Agreement was signed. The agreement created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, known as DMZ, to separate North and South Korea. However, no peace treaty was ever signed, so the countries are still technically at war. Number 4. The Cuban Missile Crisis. Probably the best known event of the Cold War, the Cuban Missile Crisis, was a 13-day-long confrontation between the US and the USSR following the discovery of Soviet ballistic missile deployment in Cuba, just 90 miles from US shores. During a secret meeting between Nikita Khrushchev and Fidel Castro, the pair agreed to construct a number of missile launch facilities on the Caribbean island, following the failed US Bay of Pigs invasion. On October 16, a US Air Force U-2 spy plane produced clear photographic evidence of medium-range and intermediate-range ballistic missile facilities. The US established a naval blockade on October 22 to prevent further resources from reaching Cuba, and the White House announced it would not permit offensive weapons to be delivered. After several days of tense negotiations, an agreement was reached between US President John F. Kennedy and Khrushchev. The Soviets would dismantle their offensive weapons in Cuba and return them to the Soviet Union, subject to United Nations verification, in exchange for a US public declaration and agreement to avoid invading Cuba again. Number 3 on the list is Able Archer. Able Archer was the code name for a military operation carried out in November 1983 by NATO. While it was simply a communications test, paranoid Soviet agents believed this was exactly how the US would mask a real attack. The operation introduced several new elements not seen in previous years and also simulated a move through all alert phases from DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 1, which KGB agents wrongly assumed to be a real move into the highest nuclear threat. The Soviet Politburo believed their only chance of surviving a NATO strike was to preempt it, and so they readied its nuclear arsenal. The CIA reported activity in the Baltic Military District and in Czechoslovakia, and it determined that nuclear-capable aircraft in Poland and East Germany were placed on high alert status with readying of nuclear strike forces. However, East German spy Rainier Rupp, also known under the code name Mosul or later Topaz, worked in the NATO headquarters in Brussels and claims he helped avert nuclear war by transmitting the message that NATO was not preparing any attack whatsoever. Days later, on November 11, 1983, Soviet fears were eased as they learned the exercise had finished thanks to double agent Oleg Gordievsky. Number 2. 9/11 Attacks 2001. On September 11, 2001, a series of 4 coordinated terrorist attacks were carried out by Al-Qaeda against the US. Orchestrated by Osama bin Laden, they killed almost 3,000 people and injured more than 6,000 others. 4 passenger planes were hijacked by 19 terrorists, with 2 of them crashed into the World Trade Center, 1 into the Pentagon, and the 4th landing in a field in Pennsylvania. Mohammed Atta, one of the ringleaders, said Al-Qaeda initially planned to target nuclear installations rather than the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, but decided against it, fearing things could get out of control. The US responded to the attacks by launching the War on Terror and invaded Afghanistan with the support of UK, Canada, and Australia, alongside 40 other NATO members. The war is still technically ongoing and has seen more than 70,000 terrorists killed and almost 40,000 civilians being killed. Number 1. Checkpoint Charlie, 1961. Checkpoint Charlie was first set up in August 1961 when Communist East Germany erected the Berlin Wall to prevent its citizens from fleeing to the democratic West. There were 2 other checkpoints, Checkpoint Alpha and Checkpoint Bravo. Charlie was notable for its location on a historic street in the American-occupied city center. It was the only gateway where East Germany allowed Allied diplomats, military personnel, and foreign tourists to pass into Berlin's Soviet sector. One of the most nail-biting chapters of the Cold War began on October 22, 1961, when US diplomat Alan Leitner attempted to cross Checkpoint Charlie to attend the opera in East Berlin. East German border guards demanded to see Leitner's passport, but he refused on the grounds that only Soviet officials had the authority to inspect his papers. He only got through the checkpoint after he left and returned with a complement of armed US soldiers and military jeeps. When East German officials continued to deny Americans entry into East Berlin, US, General Lucius Clay put on a show of force by moving 10 M48 tanks into position around Checkpoint Charlie. The East German Soviet allies responded by positioning 3 dozen T-55 tanks near the eastern border. On October 27, 10 of them rode forward to meet the American armor. For some 16 hours, the two sides stared each other down in one of the only armed confrontations of the Cold War. The potential for World War III was only averted when President John F. Kennedy contacted Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev and convinced him to withdraw his tanks. So that's pretty much it for this week. Thanks for watching this video. Please like, share and subscribe my channel. Until next week, thank you and goodbye.